Hello and welcome to B-Sides Las Vegas. I am the Cavalry Talk. This is a panel on, I totally forgot to look it up before the talk. A panel on...
Well, with that fantastic introduction, I'll pick it up and take over.
Let me just add, thank you to our sponsors, Amazon, Protivity, Versprite, Tenable, Source of Knowledge, and of course, if you would like to continue the conversation later, follow the presenters on Peer List, and then Bo will take over and introduce the topic.
All right, thank you very much. So we're going to try something different for a B-Sides talk. We're going to try and pack in as many people to do quick talks as we can. That's kind of been the theme of the morning. We started it off with a couple of very, very good technical talks to kind of get everybody awake this morning. And now we're going to move into something that's a little bit different. So we've got 4 presenters up here who I'll introduce in a second. And each one of them has kind of a new idea that they've been almost testing in the lab. And they're bringing out now into the light of day to get some exposure to it. So we're going to do 15 minutes times 4, then go into a kind of a panel Q&A where we can pressure test some of the ideas and some of the theories and some of the theses that they've come up with. And the idea is we want to bring some net new ideas into InfoSec. We want to try some models that might or might not work. We want to experiment, because if we want to see something different, we have to try something different. And we need a diversity of perspectives, a diversity of approaches to solve an increasingly diverse problem space in the Internet of Things and around the cybersecurity implications to human life and public safety. So I mentioned we've got 4 speakers. The first up will be Carolyn Wong. She's VP of Security Strategy at Cobalt out in San Francisco. She's standing up right there. Then we'll have Robert Wood present. Robert is Head of Trust and Security for Nuna Healthcare. Then we'll go to David Batz. David is Senior Director of Cyber and Infrastructure Security at the Edison Electric Institute. And then we'll have Steve Luczynski, who is Deputy Director of Cyber Plans and Operations at the Office of the Secretary of Defense out in Washington, D.C. So hopefully without too much further ado, we will get started here with some slides. Were you about good, or do you need a couple more minutes? Okay. Carolyn, come on out.
Yeah, so I think we're still getting the slides up. I'm really pleased to announce that they are Moana-themed slides. I have a 2-year-old, and one of the things that I now know that nobody told me about being a parent is that when you have a toddler, your toddler wants to watch the same thing over and over and over. And thank goodness she's chosen Moana, because I don't know who of you have seen the Disney film, but it's actually fantastic. Anyway, slides are upcoming. So the title of my lightning talk is Significant Soft Skills. It Takes a Village. And the perspective that I'm hoping to bring today is the one that says there's an awful lot that's very exciting and sexy about the newest threats and the latest attacks and how to technically solve a problem. And perhaps there's a lot of folks in this room who have thought to themselves, I understand the technical solution to this problem. Why won't all these other people just cooperate? Because the thing about security is that it can't be done by one person, and it can't be done by one team in an ivory tower. In order to get it to work, you basically have to talk to other people and help them understand what you're trying to achieve, because a lot of times we're also trying to get other people to do stuff for us too. Whether that's convincing our employees to adopt safe practices and follow security policy. Maybe that's talking to the IT team or the system administrators about establishing secure configurations. There's a whole list of scenarios that I could go into. And actually, Bob and I, here's a little kind of preview. 4:30 this afternoon, we are going to do an additional talk that's all about hacking office politics. But what I want to talk about today is 2 specific scenarios. One is about incident response, and one is about budget justification. These are two scenarios that you may find yourself involved with that involve a lot of talking to other people. I myself have been in the field for 12 years now. I started out on the global information security team at eBay and then went over to Zynga, the Farmville company, and then transitioned to the vendor side. So I've done some product management at Symantec, some management consulting for Cigital, and I currently work for a startup that's based in San Francisco called Cobalt. So I've been in a variety of different roles, and I've had a variety of different perspectives. The scenarios that I'm going to talk to you about today are real scenarios, but I won't tell you, obviously, the secret stuff. But I can tell you that these are situations that I've been in before myself. So if we had slides, you would see significant soft skills, it takes a village, and then you would see Moana and her village. And then the following slide would say, well, which villages have I worked in? And it would have listed all the places that I've worked. And then the slide after that is the volcano monster, and it says incident response. So let me talk about a personal experience that's kind of like incident response. When an incident occurs, and there are lots of different levels of incidents, low severity being, oh, there's something weird going on that we need to look into, and critical severity being, the bad guys have won, and we've lost something, and we need to figure out what the impact has been, we need to contain it, we need to do short and long-term mitigations. And then you have to talk to all of these people about it. So I was involved in helping out with a rather large data breach several years ago, 17 million records compromised. And we found out a week before some people knew, but they were too afraid to tell our team. And when I got involved, it was one of those things where it was like, for 2 weeks, the entire security team is on 24/7 rotation. So I was in the office. Luckily, I got the daytime shift. So I was in the office 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. One of my responsibilities was documenting the breach timeline. So you ask this question, what did the bad guys do? And as you receive and discover more information about it, you write it down. So I was in charge of writing that down. And then at 7 p.m., I would go home, someone would take over, and it was like toothbrushes in the office and cots. People were sleeping there. So it was like an all hands on deck type of scenario. So in an incident, I would constantly get these questions as I'm documenting this breach timeline. Our PR team wants to know what's going on. And how do you explain something like, a major breach to a PR team? And that's going to be different from, well, now the legal team wants to know what's going on. Well, now the CTO wants to know what's going on. Well, now the CFO wants to know what's going on. And these are all different people who are going to want to know a version of what's going on that makes sense to them and that helps them to get out of panic mode. So I'll give a brief example. I was actually in the emergency room this previous Saturday. I went in with severe abdominal pain, which was suspected to be appendicitis. I'm here and I didn't end up having my appendix taken out, but it's a similar scenario where you're like, okay, there's something wrong and I know there's something wrong, but I don't know what's wrong. And I just need you to set my expectations. So the doctor said to me, okay, we've done a physical exam, next we're going to do lab work, next we're going to do a CAT scan, and then we're going to go from there. And that really helped me to set my expectations. They basically said, it was like 2 p.m., and they were like, if you end up needing to go into surgery, that'll occur around 7 p.m., you're not allowed to eat any food. And that was okay, because at least I knew that there was a plan and that I was going to be taken care of. And I think that's similar to what we need to do when we're talking to people about a security incident that occurs. One of my favorite resources on this topic is actually the NIST cybersecurity framework. And this is because it's actually organized around an event happening. So there are these 5 categories: identify, detect, protect, detect, respond, and recover. And this is a great way to frame what's going on in an incident to somebody who's not necessarily a security person, somebody who may have very little, if any, technical skills. You can simply say to someone, here is the stage we're in, and this is what's going to happen next. These are lightning talks, so I'm going to move along pretty quickly. The next topic is budget justification. So, we know that we need money and resources and tools and people. And how do you convince someone that you need money to do that when what that means is that money is going to be taken away from another project? That might mean that money is going to be taken away from a new application feature that's going to be built. That might mean that money is going to be taken away from a major upgrade, whatever it is. So I've talked to 2 CISOs. I worked for one CISO who was incredibly successful at this. And one of the really good ways to do it, if you're a CISO, and if you're the type of CISO who has CISO friends that you can just call up and say, so how much money are they giving you? The best way that honestly I know how to get security budget is to call up your peers and ask them how much money they're getting. And confidentially put that information onto a slide and present that and say, look, this is what our peers are getting for trying to solve a similar problem. This is what our competition is getting. That being said, there's a lot of other ways to go about it. I actually have a security metrics book that I wrote in 2011, and I'm going to give it away to the person who, if you're staying for the Q&A session at noon, ask the best question. So security metrics are another way to go about doing that. To what extent can you convince someone that you have a plan, that you know what you're doing, and then show them measurable progress against that plan? Next slide, please. So people talk about this concept of risk tolerance, right? If you're in a really heavily regulated business environment, maybe you have a relatively low risk tolerance, relatively low risk tolerance. If you're working for, an early stage SaaS startup, maybe you have a relatively high security tolerance. But you can't walk into a room full of executives and say, so what's your risk tolerance? Because that's a difficult question for someone to answer. So what I'm going to present on the next couple of slides is some ideas about how you can have a risk tolerance discussion with someone in a way that's a little more effective than going in and saying, what's your risk tolerance on a scale of 1 to 10? And what does that mean? So the first ones are pretty high level. I'm actually going to peek over Bob's shoulder because I don't have these totally memorized. But no, this is cool. So the idea behind these is, can you get someone whose buy-in you need to agree to a security-related objective? Because if you can, and you can say, okay, you and I both believe in this goal, and we're going to try and accomplish this objective, can you trust me to execute on a plan that makes this happen? Oh, and by the way, can you pay me for the plan that's going to make this happen? So some of the high-level agreements that you might be able to use in your organization are things like, well, security for us is a competitive differentiator. People are not going to use our service if they don't believe it's secure. So we can use this in marketing. We can use this in sales. Another one, kind of like I mentioned, call up your friends who are doing your same job at a different organization and say, well, this is what they're doing. And if we're not doing the same level of thing, maybe we should talk about why. Achieve a defensible level of due care. That's certainly going to be very different in different environments. And then, sometimes the easy one, but sometimes not, comply with something that's regulatory, something that's contractual, or here's an industry standard. Next slide, please. Thank you. So the next set, which are a little more, in my mind, descriptive and a little lower level, are things that you can use to describe the value of security to a non-security person whose buy-in you need. Can we sign up together to agree that it's important that we reduce the probability that attackers can cause critical applications to stop functioning? And Like most people would agree to that, right? And then you can come up with a plan and then you can show them progress against that plan. Can we agree that it's important and that we need to do the things that need to be done so that we are requiring fixes for bugs for which well-known attacks exist? Can we agree that it's important to prevent the same security defects or incidents from occurring over and over again? I think these are sufficiently like normal human speak for anyone to understand and believe that it's important, yet at the same time detailed enough that you can write an action plan to make this happen. And then you can explain, well, I'm asking for this much money because it's going to help us accomplish this. Next slide, please. So the takeaways are, check out the NIST cybersecurity framework. Great for messaging. It does what a lot of frameworks and best practices do. You know, it's a list of controls, but they're categorized really nicely. They're mapped to all these other frameworks. CERT incident management also is sort of just a standard go-to if you find yourself needing to create an incident response plan or in the middle of an incident and needing to know how to talk about it to different people. And then security metrics. I've got this book for whoever has the best question in the next session. Thank you.
All right, so next we're going to swap over to Bob. It looks like you're already ready already.
Boom.
You beat me to the punch.
All right, sorry about the technical difficulties. Everything worked prior to coming here, we swear. We did test. So we're going to shift gears now, and we're going to talk about thinking about the big picture when you're talking about risk to stakeholders within an organization. And I want to do that through the lens of healthcare data security. So for those that are not familiar with healthcare or with me in general, I work at a healthcare analytics company. We handle a lot of data. And so a lot of what we do touches a lot of things in the healthcare system at large. And so the first things first is I want to have people remember this number, 129,738,939, as kind of backdrop or context throughout this quick little lightning talk. And that is the number of records that were exposed in 2015 and 2016 alone in the healthcare industry. And one of the great and not so great and unique things about healthcare is that simultaneously a healthcare data breach has the ability to affect not only individuals, like a credit card breach you might see fraud or illicit payments or something like that, but it also has the ability to put strain on the bigger healthcare system through that same data breach. So that information that is lost has the ability to affect multiple things, like a ripple effect or shrapnel, blast zone. So you could think about this as from an economics perspective. If a hospital has a data breach, hospitals handle lots of data. Companies like ours handle lots of data. And so economically, we are responsible for protecting the data that we are handling. All makes sense. However, we only have so much budget. Also makes sense. And if and when that entity that's handling the data experiences a data breach or just unauthorized mishandling, whatever it is that exposes or puts that data at risk, you start to see this ripple effect occur. So the first thing that could occur in a hypothetical scenario, hypothetical or not so hypothetical, is potential Medicaid fraud or other types of fraud that adds hundreds of millions of dollars of just fraudulent overhead to the system. That ends up trickling down and increasing costs for a bunch of other people. The hospital does not actually face those initial costs. They face the cost of maybe reputational damage or maybe OCR, HHS fines. That's where it stops for the hospital. People are still going to go there. People still need their healthcare providers to do what they do. But then bigger than that, the individuals who are affected, they might also experience really, really obnoxious identity theft. So one of the gnarly things about healthcare data, of course, is that it's a lot of information that you can't change unless you feel compelled to, get thrown into witness protection or, go off the grid in some way. There's a lot of information that sticks with you for life. It is your life story in a medical record. And so the kind of identity theft and the kind of fraud that can occur on a personal level is very, very severe. And again, the hospital doesn't necessarily face that particular cost. And so the security personnel at those hospitals are left identifying and arguing for budget to protect something that is far, far bigger than them. And we at Nuna find ourselves in this same kind of situation, as do many individuals. So the first thing, in order to actually start protecting ourselves and protecting that data, we need to find risks. And so typically in the security industry, it ends up looking similar to this, is we bring in specialists with a very particular set of skills, and they come in and they find stuff. They use tools, they use their brains, they use any number of means available to them, and then they give you a long report, or they give you a pile of vulnerabilities, whatever that output happens to be. And you're left kind of scratching your head saying, all right, what do I do with these things now? And one of the other things is a lot of that analysis ends up looking at the problem through a very narrow dimension, through a technology-focused dimension. And so I want to challenge folks to start thinking a little bit more about the system that you're operating in, the business or organization that you're operating in, and finding other ways to identify risks. And a few of my favorites that happen to engage a lot of other stakeholders in your risk management process are things like scenario planning. If you Google that, you'll find a lot of resources on that is more about business contingency planning, or the military uses this to stress test plans, things like that. Tabletop exercises in war games, or just red teaming. And you can red team in a number of different ways. Don't listen to anyone who tells you red teaming is a pen test. Red teaming is more about adversarial alternative analysis. And one way that we do this on our team is we use a little game either from the 10th Man. We call it the 10th Man. If you've ever watched World War Z, the movie, you'll get that reference. Or another method called the 6 Hats, which is basically people in a meeting take contrarian points of view, and they just poke holes in everything that one party is proposing. And it's a way to really flush out potential risks to an idea, whether it's a project, a plan, a solution to a problem, whatever it happens to be. And so once you have your pile of risks, you then need to actually go do something about it, because having a big pile of risks or negative loss events is not necessarily enough to fix the problem, as we all well know. So you have to take that pile of risks, you have to go to somebody in your organization, you have to do something about it. And lo and behold, business leaders care about the business. Probably not surprising, but we also care about the business as security professionals. We just care about it through a little bit different lens, as do they. The CFO cares about the business through a financial stability lens. Engineering leadership cares about the business through the success of the products that they're delivering, things to that effect. CIOs in the stability of the IT infrastructure that they're rolling out. And so when you're trying to find ways to communicate with these different stakeholders, you need to find the kinds of metrics or the kinds of language that they speak and what they're actually measured on from a success perspective, and align your story around those success metrics. And so if you're talking to somebody in engineering, you may frame security risks as bugs. If you're talking to somebody in finance, you may frame it around expected loss and dollar values. If you're talking to a board or other executives, people who are responsible for the strategic direction of the organization, you may frame it or map security objectives and your plan, your project plan, your roadmap into balanced scorecard, or roll it around KPIs that they're tracking at an organizational health level, things like that. All right, and then we're going to wrap up talking about storytelling. So in order to actually get somebody to buy into something, we need to tell effective stories to the stakeholders that we're working with. We can't be one-trick ponies, and we can't take the same exact story and peddle it across the entire organization, because a CFO is not going to care if I walk in and start telling them that we have 30 high-risk findings, 500 medium-risk findings, and 1,000 low-risk findings. That means absolutely nothing to a CFO, and it means absolutely nothing to a lot of security professionals. It's just a big number at the end of the day. We don't actually know what is wrong with the organization. And so first things first, we of course need to collect all of our relevant risks, and note the key and operative word relevant there. If you're talking to a CFO you may not want to bring everything you know about to the table. You want to bring the things that are going to be relevant to the discussion you're about to have. Find your stakeholder, pick your alignment lens. So, don't come in, again, using the same story with everyone that you're talking to. Find who you're talking to, find what's important to them, and use the language that that is going to resonate with them. Think about it as a social engineering exercise if you must, but it's really about making sure that your argument is going to have teeth with who it is you're trying to argue or discuss, converse with. So we then want to build a story around what those risks, those relevant risks are, how they could affect the organization. So chain them into an attack tree, for instance. Chain them into how it could potentially affect the organization, what the organization stands for. So at Nuna, we do a lot of work with CMS, with the bigger healthcare system at large. We're not working with hospitals and very specific healthcare providers. We're working with a lot of back-end infrastructure. And so to us, one thing that really resonates with our executive team is how what we're building and how we're doing business might affect the overall healthcare system. Because we want to help do our part to make the system better, deliver lower, cheaper, more effective costs for ultimately the people who are consuming those healthcare services. And so if we can tell a story around risk that threatens those fundamental values that we're targeting, then that's far more compelling. And so this is somewhat related, but make sure you connect the dots to the bigger picture, again, what the organization is actually trying to achieve. And step 5, I think, is really critical and something that a lot of people in our field fail to recognize, or at least struggle recognizing. And it's something that I also struggle recognizing consistently or applying consistently. But is when you're talking to people, you have to recognize that everyone has their own goals to service the organization that they're working with or business partners. And you have to show empathy to what is important to other people. And in trying to get your point across, you have to be willing to give ground. You can't walk in with 100 risk events that you want to, or 100 potential negative loss events that you want to mitigate. You have to be willing to compromise and say, well, I understand that we can't allocate the budget to, get rid of everything, to make the world completely secure, because it's just not realistic. We have to be willing to have a manager to manager discussion and talk about what's actually best for the business. Sometimes it's not always remediating everything, because that might put a huge loss on usability, or a huge strain on usability, or infrastructure, or just budget in general. Like, there's a bunch of potentially negative effects or impacts from somebody else's perspective if we were to get our way entirely. So be willing to give a little bit of ground and be empathetic to what other people are going through, and partner with that person. So that is where the empathy feedback loop really comes into play. So be willing to partner with other people, your leadership peers in your organization. And when you're talking the same language, and ultimately when you recognize that you're both on the same page, trying to make your organization better and more resilient, more profitable, more impactful, whatever it happens to be, then you profit. So thank you very much.
Nope, we're good. Good morning. So I am here today to talk about something that's pretty exciting, and that is cyber mutual assistance. And next slide. Thanks. So cyber mutual assistance is about mutual assistance for the electricity sector in North America. This is a program that is sponsored by the Electricity Subsector Coordinating Council. Now, when I say that, you'll say, Dave, that sounds swell. What is that thing that you just said it was? This is the Electricity Subsector Coordinating Council. It's fundamentally, it's a place where the electric grid owners and operators meet and interact with their government partners from across the United States. It's a place where they can function, have liaisons to talk about events or recovery from events that have a regional or multi-regional effect across the United States. If there was a bumper sticker for what is the Electricity Subsector Coordinating Council, it's about unity of effort and unity of message. And their meetings definitely do not look like this, ever. So what it really looks like is we've got 31 CEOs from across the United States, different types of utility business structures, from investor-owned utilities to cooperatives to municipal or public power. So the CEOs, the leaders from these organizations, meet with their counterparts in the federal government, which consists primarily of representatives from the Department of Energy. The Department of Energy is the sector-specific agency for the electricity sector, along with the Department of Homeland Security. Oftentimes there'll be representatives from the FBI, DOD, occasionally other three-letter agencies. And the focus is to bring about unity between both the industry and the government, so that this would never happen, that the government would throw parts of the industry under the bus when there's large events. So we want to avoid those types of things. This is a satellite picture of Hurricane Felix, which was a number of years ago, but it is emblematic of an issue that the electricity industry has been involved with for nearly 100 years, and that is mutual assistance. So when a hurricane hits Texas, or a hurricane hits the East Coast, or you've got wildfires in California, you've got floods in the Midwest, what happens is that utilities that are under duress, under stress, they're being attacked by non-intelligent actors like hurricanes, they call for help. And utilities who are not being attacked by hurricanes come alongside those utilities and help. They put up power poles, they string conductor, they function to assist the utility that is having the problem. So in 2015, the industry was involved in a very large exercise called NERC Grid X3. And the Grid Exercise 3 consisted of hundreds of utilities from across the United States in an exercise where, in theory, there were active shooters, there were explosives, substations were getting blown up, there was malware. It was just a disaster. It was terrible. But it was both a cyber attack and a physical attack simultaneously. In the executives, there was a portion of the exercise that were senior executives that sat around the table, and they said, we have a problem. Right now, today, we have a model for utilities helping utilities in the face of physical events, hurricanes or even explosions, that sort of thing. We have a model to address that. We don't have a similar model for the cyber. This surely shall not stand. And so the council met again, totally not like that. They pounded their fist on the desk and they said, we need us, essentially, a cyber mutual assistance program to provide fundamentally for the cyber surge capacity, where we're in a situation where a given utility is being overrun by a cyber attack, other utilities can come alongside and provide assistance. All good. Well, what is the assistance really meant to serve? Fundamentally, cyber mutual assistance is about the delivery of assistance for energy. It's not about helping a company send out bills on time or get a little web server restarted. It's not about that. It is about the delivery of essential services that our customers, and really when we think about in this country, in North America in general, we have a real problem culturally and societally if we do not have electricity. So that's what cyber mutual assistance is about, the delivery of electricity or energy for our customers. Now, unlike conventional mutual assistance, where you've got literally bucket trucks that are driving hundreds or thousands of miles, for Superstorm Sandy, we had literally thousands of crews from across the United States and Canada go to the East Coast to help put back together the East Coast that was really severely impacted by Superstorm Sandy. Within the context of cyber mutual assistance, I'll tell you, generally bucket trucks are not really a good way to transport people. But frankly, probably the first thing that you're going to want to do is not send people from utility A to utility B. Probably the first thing that you're going to want to do is you want to pick up the phone, you want to pick up a computer webinar, you want to have the asset owners talk to other asset owners about what's going on, what are the indicators of compromise, what have you done that's worked, what have you done that has not worked, what was the specific target of the malware or the problem that you're experiencing. So the first thing that's going to happen is a convening function of subject matter experts regarding the event and to talk about what can be done to address it and approach it. So one of the things, I don't know if your companies are like this. Electric companies are not like super eager in general to talk openly about vulnerabilities or exploits. People are nervous. People don't like airing out their dirty laundry, right? We get that. So cyber mutual assistance is predicated on every utility company that participates, they sign a non-disclosure agreement so that under the protection of the non-disclosure agreement, entities can have adult discussions with other entities about what happened, where were we vulnerable, what really happened to us. We think that as a general matter, these discussions cannot happen without certain protection, legal protection regarding those discussions. The next thing, we've got the money up here. Cyber mutual assistance is not charity. So in the event that things happen, like people travel from location A to location B to help others out, the expectation is that the receiving utility will cover the labor costs, transportation costs, hotels, meals, all this stuff. It's not charity. And then finally, justice down there. People were nervous about, well, if I help somebody out and things don't go perfectly, am I going to get sued? So the answer is no, is that unless somebody in a wantonly willful manner is engaged in misconduct or gross negligence, they're going to be held harmless. So sort of a good Samaritan provision there. Now, so we've got three things going on here, including cute puppies. Well, because they're cute. Fundamentally, cyber mutual assistance is a voluntary program. It's voluntary. So a utility can sign up for it. They can even receive a call for help. They can help if they want to. If it does not make sense, they don't have to. There is not an affirmative obligation for them to provide any particular resource or assistance. It's voluntary. So you may have noticed in my first slide there's a little asterisk regarding electricity. One of the things that has just happened very recently in June is that the Electricity Subsector Coordinating Council agreed to expand cyber mutual assistance to include those natural gas utilities who might be interested in participating in the program. So we think that that's really good news because there are a lot of interdependencies between natural gas and electricity. And in particular, the amount of generation that is derived from natural gas has been growing dramatically over the last few years. So there's a lot of interdependencies, and we think it makes a lot of sense for a good partnership. Now, I would be singing you a song if I just said, well, life always has blue skies with puffy clouds and unicorns. That is not actually reality. There are some challenges. So let's talk about what some of those challenges are. Fundamentally, within the context of cyber mutual assistance, let's say that an entity is being attacked regarding a very specific set of equipment that they have. The other utilities are really going to be asking themselves the question, am I next? Is the attack that's happening here going to happen to me? Cyber attacks, as a general matter, tend to be no-notice events. Normally, we don't see a cyber storm hovering off the East Coast with a 3 to 4 day warning and say, okay, the cyber is going to hit New York now. That's not normally how the cyber happens, not normally. So we can't really schedule these. We can't warn people generally 3 or 4 days ahead of time, unlike hurricanes. And then finally, the typewriter is there to depict the keyboard. As a general matter, utilities are not very keen on the idea of people who they've never seen before showing up into their control system and clacking away on the keyboards. Probably that's not going to happen. But that having been said, we've got some pretty exciting metrics. Right now, as of yesterday, we have 121 utilities from across the United States and Canada, because there is the North American grid, but the utilities that are participating include investor-owned utilities, co-ops, public power, federal power marketing administrations, ISO RTOs, and transmission-only providers. So when we look at the utilities that are directly serving end customers, our calculations indicate that if we put all utilities together, that we serve approximately 80% of customer meters in the United States are served by utilities that are part of cyber mutual assistance. So that's pretty exciting. Thank you.
All right, I get to back clean up with everybody. My name is Steve Luczynski, as Bo mentioned earlier, and my talk is about taking a more proactive approach to cybersecurity. And of course, I knew what Dave was going to say, so I had to throw some hurricane pictures up there. But I think that worked out rather fortunately, so I'll build on some of his good ideas. As Bo said, I work at the Pentagon. I'm currently in the Air Force. It's given me some good insight. I think where the Galactic Senate is not what he's doing, I am absolutely in the heart of that, and I get to see that. So I bring that up in the sense of it's given me perspective, and that's what has led to the thoughts and where I participated in this work. Also, the big giant caveat, flip-flops, beard, I'm not in uniform. Nothing I'm saying has anything to do with my current job. It's all my personal opinion. So I will not talk about anything in D.C. I have no opinion on current events, and we'll go from there. So walking away, what would I want you to take out of this, my presentation? We cannot just sit around and wait for a major cyber attack to happen. And I'll get into what I mean by that here in just a moment. Our government needs help, surprise. If we wait around just for the government to come up with a solution, we're going to have a lot of problems down the road if we do get a major attack. And I think that's where I'm going to say we, a part of your community, the smart technical folks, the big thinkers, anybody that can come up with a good idea needs to chime in and be a part of this solution. And that's what I want to talk to you about today. So on the slides, at the end of 2016, on the left, you've got Hurricane Matthew. On the right, you've got just a quick heat map of the Mirai botnet. And I put those up there as a way to give you an analogy in how I think about and what I'm going to talk about a solution. And the idea is one of them, the hurricane, that is not man-made, so it's definitely different than the Mirai attack. But they do have some similarities. We see how they come across towards us a little bit, and like Dave said, not always with a lot of warning for a cyber attack. We think we know how they're going to move towards us, and we can prepare for them. We can put things in place to get ready to mitigate their effects across a wide area. And that's how our government is preparing for a major cyber incident. We are waiting we're preparing, and we're going to have a heck of a reaction to it. And that's where I think there's a problem, because that is just waiting to get hit, and that's where we need to make some changes. So the more proactive stance, if you would, please. So again, building on just the analogy that I mentioned before, state of Florida, that's where I grew up. Hurricanes, near and dear to my heart, having dealt with that. Mom and dad are still there, so I care and I watch very closely. And then just a quick depiction of this is how the internet gets to the country, and that's just the submarine cables. There's lots of other ways, but just the idea that even though I say there are some similarities in the analogy that I'm building here, it's the differences that we need to key in on. The fact that we don't know how a hurricane is going to get here. To some extent, we know, and we know who owns how a cyber attack is going to come into our country and get through our borders. We don't really know the mechanics and the physics of a hurricane. We're figuring that out. We know how code's written. We know how all of that works going through the fiber optic, so we can do something with that. And then more importantly, what I pointed out earlier, we can't do anything to change the mind of a hurricane, but we certainly know there is a human behind a cyber attack. No matter how automated it is, somebody put that into action. So how can we get that and affect it in the way that we want? And that's where I say, instead of waiting, right now, I can get punched and I can have amazing doctors and they'll clean me up and they'll eventually make it stop hurting. I'd rather not get punched. I'd rather deflect that ever coming towards me. Even better, instead of waiting for somebody to swing at me, I'd rather show and demonstrate my ability that they do not want to pay the price if they actually even try to swing at me. If you want to call that deterrence, that's fine. I stay away from that only in the sense of that brings up nuclear deterrence, and then we're going to go down a path that there's no amount of booze in the bar that we can finish that discussion. There's too much there. So deterrence, coercion, co-opting, whatever it is, I want that not to happen. I don't even want to have to deflect it. I'd want to prevent it completely. So that's what I'm talking about. And then as I mentioned before, when I say a significant cyber attack, something we have not seen. We've had some big things, but we have not seen the big, giant, high-end, major where you expect your government to get into action and fix it, and you expect your government to actually be good at fixing it on any given day, but that is your expectation. So when I say cyber attack, not just your random servers or some service is bad, but I'm talking about the big one. And so, again, perspective of being in government and working on the civilian side of the Department of Defense and how we deal with the interagency. I think, everybody knows previous administration, the policy was businesses, you're on your own. We're not going to contribute there. Critical infrastructure, key resources, that's where the government's going to come in and help out, because those are the things you need to live, water, electricity, the financial sectors included in that, all of those types of things. And that guidance hasn't changed even with the transition of administrations. And again, perspective-wise, I think everybody would agree, we're struggling a little bit in the government. WannaCry, Petya, everything that's going on, the Russian election hacking, things are not that great. So those are not even at the level that I'm talking about of the major cyber incidents. So if we're bumbling along at those relatively easy incidents, not easy by any means, but certainly easier than what I'm getting after, then how are we going to perform when there's something big, when all the bureaucracy shows up to help out, trips over itself in trying to do that, and tries to introduce it, hey, who are you? What can you do? Oh, what do you do in DHS? That's not what we should be doing. We should have an established system that all of that is ironed out so we can react to the bigger things. And if we're not busy doing the bigger things, maybe we got time for the somewhat smaller things, so it's a good balance from there. And that's where I'll take you through, slide if you would please. So bear with me for a moment. It's a little bit of an eye chart, but the way that I will describe this, I'll use again another analogy. If you've ever heard of Joint Interagency Task Force South, that is a government operation that goes against the drug trafficking that's coming up through the Gulf of Mexico. And if going across the top of the chart, FBI, DHS, and DHS includes Customs and Borders, ATF, immigration, you have all those elements, and DOD's in there with the intel community. And so now everybody is able to use their assets and what authorities they have to execute their part of the mission and work together very closely, to the point that They're in the same room. They know each other. They are not just talking. They're not just sharing info, but they're actually executing operations. An example, DoD has the ability to look at things far away, intelligence, reconnaissance, aircraft, ships. We can move things around very quickly and easily, but I can't go arrest anybody in the Department of Defense except for some special circumstances. But I can take the Customs and Border guy, the ATF, I can take the FBI guy, and I can put them in a place that when the drug runner shows up, then I can go ahead and move in and arrest him. State Department's there working with other countries in the region so that all the diplomatic parts of that get solved. So that is an example. We won't get into the merits of the whole drug war and things like that, but the idea that the government is working together, operating and not having to come back for permissions and getting the job done. And so that's the idea that I want you to have in your mind as I go through this. And I say integrated, cooperating, in the same room, getting the job done. Now let's put that in the context of a major cyber event, as I mentioned before. Again, you've got FBI up at the top of the chart. They can do their law enforcement job, arresting when needed. They can work internationally outside the U.S. to make the same arrangements, and that's been done before. DHS is handling things internal to the country, and then DoD, like you would expect, they're staying outside the borders and they're looking downrange and trying to prevent things from getting here. You have the rest of the government going around the chart, starting at the bottom right there. You've got the other branches with Congress and their oversight. You've got the regulatory bodies. Depending on the type of incident, you've got Treasury, if it's the financial sector, Health and Human Services, and also the Department of Energy. You also have at the state level and what they can bring in with the National Guard and their capabilities. And so that is how we're structured right now to react in the case of some type of major cyber incident. So with that in mind, what ought to come to your mind, I'm guessing, is as I went through this is something that came to mind, is that, okay, well, then we're already doing that. What are you talking about, Steve? We are doing that. Separate ops centers, they talk and they try to practice, but this is not something that is already set up, already established, and that's where I think the benefit comes from of combining them, building off of the previous model so that they're together and they can operate more effectively. Hey, you just want to start another government agency, Steve. That's more money. No, I'm with you on that too. Without naming any names, I would say it's probably fair. It's fair to say that there's some government entities that aren't always as effective as we thought they would be when we set them up. So how do we maybe get rid of those, combine them, put them into something that actually works? And if this is the foundation for it and that combination helps, then that is helping get after the problem. And like I mentioned before, the main difference here is we don't have to wait. We can actually affect and show human on the other side of this major attack. Don't bother doing this. This is what the U.S. already has established. This is what we're already capable of doing. Don't even bother taking that swing because you know it's not going to be worth the price. And that's where I think we get after this problem, because it isn't just a government-only problem. And I've purposely focused up to this point. You might be wondering, hey, why am I hearing this part of it? Because the tendency, in my opinion, is that we look into the government for the government answers and all the subject matter experts. The bottom left there, that inner circle, industry, academia, that is where a lot of the expertise resides. That is where the people own the pipes that bring the internet to us. And so there's some advantages we can take advantage of there, and that's what we need to capitalize on. An example of this I just read recently. There was an article in Wired Magazine in April, Garrett Graff, and he talked through the takedown of the Game Over Zeus malware, and this was a combined effort. I feel proud that I had my presentation written before this happened there, so I want to claim it, even though I can't. But it was the FBI's Pittsburgh field office, organized Microsoft, McAfee, CrowdStrike, Dell SecureWorks, multiple countries, all of that coming together with the way that I would say that I've been thinking about this problem and how we've been going after it with this mindset. And that's where I threw down in the bottom left corner the idea of allies and partners. This can be expanded outside of our country. That's just one more element of this complex problem to get after. So with that in mind, it only brings up more questions, probably in your mind, if you would please. And that's those are the things where coming to a talk like this, being able to say, here's my big thoughts, I have no details. I have nothing but more questions after putting this thought into it. So The biggest thing that jumps out in my mind is that's a great idea. Can we divert traffic? Can we look at packets? Can we do whatever it takes to take the malware away? There are huge privacy is the first thing that comes to mind. There are legal issues. There are regulatory issues, competition, all of those things. I don't have that answer. How do we do this? Is this a group of people that are focused only on the energy sector? Is it the electrical grid? Is it oil and gas? Is it the financial institutions? So there's a lot of elements there. The telecoms, let's say they're in this group as I described it, they can't be in every single one of these. Is it a regional approach? Is it state? Who runs it? Is it military or civilian? So there's a lot more that goes into this that needs to be thought about, and includes who's going to pay for it. So if this is a giant elephant and a wicked problem that we have to get after, and we're going to eat this elephant one bite at a time, I would say we're just barely getting the plates. We haven't even bought napkins and forks and all of that. So it is a matter of starting to get the thinking, starting to get the dialogue going to get after this problem. It's a leadership problem. It's trust. How do I put somebody from my company, from my U.S. government agency in a room, and I'm going to talk with you? And if I don't do that on a daily basis, I'm not going to build the trust. And after a year of doing this, I'm not going to let you keep going there and costing the money and the salary that I'm paying. This is something that gets after across the government, because this is well beyond any election cycle. This has to be done over time to build the confidence, to build the capability. Hopefully you never actually demonstrate it, but when you need to know it's there. So that is the difficulty of this, and that's why I say it's more of a leadership problem, and the trust being the main part of that. This work, it was part of a student project, and we had this going in the summer, or in 2016, leading up to great discussions across the government, very receptive, very well received. Briefed it up through the cyber director at the National Security Council. Administration change. So I'm leaving government, and things like this are lingering out there. Good, I'll say good ideas. I feel like it's a good idea. You'll tell me otherwise. But just the idea of how do we continue this going forward? We, as citizens, can talk to our elected leaders. We can think through these problems. You can go back to industry. You can go back to your government jobs. And if you see places to do this type of cooperation or have this type of dialogue, that's what I would ask of you all, to try to grow these ideas. Get rid of this one because it's terrible and come up with something better. That's awesome. I'll gladly chip in and help on that. So that is what I'm hoping for with your questions and critiques at the end, and I appreciate your time.